Hey, anyone who watches this now or in the future, I think we're rolling, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. I've been meaning to do a week one reflection blog post on privatepook.com and mikegrassoauthor.com, but it's becoming clear that I'm just not going to find the time to do that amongst all the other things I'm trying to take care of this week. So I just decided I would go ahead and do a live YouTube video, and I would do this on the fly and just talk about how this week has gone in terms of Drilly Willis, which released on Monday. Yes, I released it on Monday. I got it done. Game got finished, and I actually released it on the second date that I set for myself. Originally, I'd set it to release summer of 2020. I delayed it to November 2020, and I actually made it. I did not have to push it back, and I'm very proud of that. I put a lot of work into making sure that it was ready to go, and it seems like all the builds are functioning very well with a couple things that I am tweaking here and there, which I'll get to in a second. So how have things gone? The first thing I want to say is strangers are playing the game, not all the people. There's people playing the game, and a good number of them are people I don't know, which is really cool. I sort of a lot of indie devs kind of put out their games, and they're like, yeah, I guess my friends and family will buy it if they want, and maybe they won't even buy it. They'll just say they will and wait until I forget. But thankfully, it's been a good number of people. It's getting some copies out there. This is not going to be the next Hollow Knight, and I didn't expect it to be, and that's totally fine. It's got some people playing it. The people who are playing it generally seem to really like it. And it's been people anywhere from, people who are in the author world I'm in to there's, a couple people in Germany who were playing it and really enjoying how wacky it is. So some overseas, some here in the States, some folks in the Metroidvania group, a couple different groups that I'm in there have really liked it. So that's been good to see that people are actually playing it, and generally they do like it. They think it's very silly in a good way. They're laughing in the appropriate parts. They're finding it very wacky and weird, and they're liking it. And I knew when I made this game that people who weren't really up for that sort of lighter Adult Swim. We're not talking Eric Andre Adult Swim. We're talking, Adventure Time, regular show, sort of that wacky humor. They really seem to like it and they connect with it. And I knew people who for that wasn't their bag. This wasn't really going to be their game. They were going to go and play, Blasphemous or something, or Dark Souls, and that's fine. That's totally cool. I like those games, by the way. This one was for people who kind of wanted that weird. I sold it from the beginning. It wasn't the exact blurb I had, but I generally would tell people it's Metroidvania meets regular show or Metroidvania meets Adventure Time. That seemed to perk people's interest, and the people who like that phrasing enjoyed the game. That was pretty good. So I'm glad to hear that when people find it, they generally like it. I have found one big challenge is getting reviews is really tricky. I sent out, I made a press release. I made two. I made a press release for the general release of the game that I sent out 2 weeks ahead of time. It is very hard to get websites to review indie games, and that's not through any fault of theirs. It's just there's so many of them out there, and I covered everything. I know it was kind of pointless to do so, but I submitted it to IGN because, hey, who knows what's going to happen? I submitted it to Kotaku and Rock Paper Shotgun. I also sent it to just little small places, little indie game websites, and generally speaking, it is very hard to get their attention. I had, thankfully, I got a couple write-ups on Linux gaming websites, which was really cool. I ended up deciding I was going to put together a Linux build. I was able to make it work. And so I got a little bit of attention from Linux games websites, and then a few places that just sort of, copied the press release and put it in, which is pretty standard. If you put out a press release, there's going to be places that are going to take it and copy and paste. And I'm glad that I got those. I don't know how much that helped, but at least those came in. They weren't official game reviews. But I did get people who at least mentioned it on their gaming websites, and it seemed to drum up at least a little bit more awareness. I was really glad to see that I've gotten some pretty cool game streamers who've done it. I had the first one I noticed was a gentleman in Germany who ended up leaving a review on Steam. I noticed. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. Then I noticed a couple other people popped in, a couple gentlemen from Twitch, and then I was really excited to see that Alexander Zankov ended up streaming it, which was wonderful, and I was really thankful, especially because he had reached out to me through the Steam support website to let me know that I had done something that had made my game less accessible to disabled gamers, which was not something I'd wanted to do. I had locked the cursor in the game so that when you're playing with a controller or keyboard controls, if you wanted to, I locked the cursor so that the cursor couldn't mess up anything you were doing with your controller. And he had very politely pointed out to me, hey, you just took away my ability to play your games. So thankfully, I was able to fix it right away, let him know, hey, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And he was gentlemanly enough to go ahead and stream it and show how you can use mHook, which is a software he uses in order to play video games extremely well, for the record, with just the use of a mouse and his chin. And if you've never seen him do that, you can look up, mouse and chin, or you can look up No Hands Play Drilly Willis. After you're done with this video, you can also, he has a video that went viral a while ago called, he played Super Meat Boy, which if you know indie games, was a humongous hit. And he just kills it at that game. It was really wonderful. What else was I going to say? Troubleshooting. There's been some troubleshooting. There's obviously been, I made a patch in order to make the game more handicap accessible for use with mHook. Another thing that I'm working on right now is a couple controller issues. Generally speaking, controller functionality with the game has worked out really well, especially if you're using a controller that is, either the Xbox One controller or has a similar layout to it. I know I'm a big fan of the Logitech F310 if you're not using an Xbox One controller. I have discovered that because of the way the axes work on the controllers, the PlayStation controller, which was not initially giving me any trouble, it turns out is giving a few players trouble. So I am working on a patch for that. I'm either going to implement a asset called In Control, or I'm just going to go ahead and try to write some code that'll make it so when you plug in a PlayStation 4 controller, it'll just change the axes to make it work for your game. So in the meantime, if you've tried a PlayStation 4 controller, you might have noticed that when you plug it in, the game goes insane. That's a PlayStation 4 controller specific issue. Working on patching that. So that's been good to see that, players have been patient and willing to, say, hey, it's a little weird with this controller. What's the deal? And for me to be able to say, hey, I'm one guy, I'm a solo developer, and I have a day job and a family and a wife, they need me, but I'm going to get to it and put that in. Hopefully this weekend. If not this weekend, then hopefully within a week, I will have that patched. What else? So controller issues, yes. And there was one player who reached out about an Xbox 360 controller issue. I have not been able to replicate it, and I have confirmed in most situations Xbox 360 controllers tend to work, but I'm hoping that if I fix the PlayStation controller issue, or if I implement an asset, paid asset for the record, called In Control, if I can purchase that asset and implement it, that should hopefully take care of the problem for anyone that might happen to. But so far, that's been very, very isolated stuff. Generally speaking, technical issues with the game have been great, right? Whether running in Steam or getting the DRM free content from itch, it's generally been working very well. So I'm happy to say that's been good. Where am I at now? Well, I have a game I made and it's out. I did it, and I'm certainly not rolling in dough, and I probably won't be as a result of this game, but I did it. And I spent a lot of time when I was making the game it took me about a year over the past year. I spent a lot of time, worrying, oh, am I making, crappy code? Am I making just, a game that is barely held together? Am I duct taping this thing? Is it just one single line of code away from breaking? And of course, the more you talk to indie devs about this, and the more you talk to people who've really done serious game development, they'll say, oh, all of our games feel like that. And that's been really nice to see, because I know when I entered the literary world, when I published my book with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt about 4 years ago, you really feel like you're an imposter in this world of authors. Ooh, authors. Beards and glasses and sophisticated hairstyles with their expensive coffee, and then you realize they're all just a bunch of people who are living paycheck to paycheck and doing their best and fighting insecurities just like anyone else. And it's the same thing with game devs. And I remember a couple times what calmed me down is I thought about something that Mike Bithell had said. For those of you who have not heard of Mike Bithell, he is well known for a couple things. What he did that I really loved was a platformer called Thomas Was Alone. And it's a perfect example of a simple concept made into a wonderful work of art. And he had a really good quote. He had a quote where, and I believe it was a tweet. I believe it was a tweet, and I'm going to go find it. Yep, here it is. Okay, so he put in a tweet, it said, "There's a word for games where the code is barely hanging together with stupid layout, utterly unscalable fixes, and workarounds on top of workarounds. Shipped." And so what basically that means is you might have a game that you put out and it might be full of small little errors and it might not be coded perfectly, and you might have lots of things in it that you would do differently if you were to start it all over again. But at the end of the day, you made your game, it's done, and you released it. And there's a lot of people who might write better code than you who never get to that point. And so that's one thing that I choose not to ever forget is sometimes you can't obsess over the one sentence in your book that wasn't perfect. You need to remember that you finished your book and you published it and it's out there. And in my instance, I published it with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. So I feel pretty good about that. I might have not published Drilly Willis with a publisher, but I finished the game. It's a full, complete experience. And it, with a few small bugs, it works extremely well. And I can obsess about little pieces of code where I maybe should have refactored it differently. I can say that maybe some other person with more game develop experience could have built it more efficiently, but I made it. It's mine. It's done. And it's released. And for that, no matter how many copies it sells or how few copies it sells, I'm choosing to feel really good about it. And that's all I have for today, guys. Thanks so much for listening.